Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Premier Smith, for being with us. Maybe I'll pick up where my Bloc colleague just left off. You mentioned that Quebec is an inspiration to Alberta, and Quebec has taken a different approach to this whole issue of carbon pricing, the only province in Canada to be part of a cap and trade or a carbon market with, I believe, California and Washington. Is that something that Alberta has looked to participate in as an alternative to the federal backstop?
I think that we have our own program. If I understand the Quebec program, there's 172 industrial outfits that operate under their cap and trade system. I believe actually ours is more expansive. I'm not sure of the total number, but we did have large emitters that were under the program. We just recently reduced the threshold so that anyone who emits, I believe it's more than 2,000 megatons a year, can also participate in our emissions reduction program. So if they are able to do better than the average in their industry, they will generate credits. Those credits can then be sold so that they can turn it into a revenue stream. So yes, we've modeled our industrial program similarly to Quebec. At the moment, it is just internal to trade within Alberta, but it has been advocated to me that we should be looking at ways of expanding it.
So you would look like, for instance, if you participated in the same carbon market as Quebec, then this whole issue of the carbon tax wouldn't be an issue for Albertans. It's not an issue for Quebecers because they're part of a different system that they've signed up for. Are you currently looking at whether to participate in that same system?
No, we won't participate in that system because, quite frankly, we transfer enough money to Ottawa that then gets spent in equalization to Quebec. So we're not looking for another way of transferring dollars out of Alberta to Quebec. What we are interested in doing is finding ways of generating our own offsets through our investment in Dow Chemical, Petrochemical, which is net zero, Air Products, hydrogen, which is net zero, Heidelberg net zero cement. We also are keen to work with the federal government on establishing an ammonia market so that we would be able to reduce emissions internationally. Article 6 has been mentioned by previous premiers. If we could simply reduce China's reliance on coal by 20%, that would offset all of the emissions of all of Canada. We also have geothermal that we are investing in. We just launched our very first competitive hydrogen fueling station, and we'll be building out our hydrogen infrastructure. We've partnered with the federal government on dual fuel vehicles for long haul. We've partnered with the federal government on hydrogen buses. So those are the kind of ways that we want to generate our own credits that can be used to offset our emissions so that we can get to net zero by 2050. At some point, once that market is more developed, perhaps we would look at having those emissions credits traded more broadly, but at the moment we're keeping it as an internal market.
So you mentioned Article 6 and this idea that we can get some sort of credits for our exports, even when those products are consumed in other jurisdictions. And Canada does export some clean products. However, we also export some products that aren't so clean, including thermal coal. Should the impact of burning thermal coal in other jurisdictions also count against our domestic emissions?
Well, I can tell you we don't export thermal coal, as I understand. I think that's mostly British Columbia that does that.
I'm not saying Alberta, but I'm saying Canada, because of course Article 6 would apply on a national basis, I believe. Correct?
Well, you actually have the ability under Section 6.2 as a subnational government to also go and negotiate those kinds of partnerships. I can tell you how South Korea and Japan and India are looking at it. Since they do have a large coal fleet, they're looking at dual combustion. So if we can apply either hydrogen or ammonia so it can be combusted at the same time, that reduces the overall emissions profile. And if there's a way for us to export those products and then get joint credit, whether it's 50-50 or whether they take 80% and we take 20%, we think that that's good for the planet. We think that that would be the way that we would make the largest reduction in emissions globally.
But I guess my question still stands. Should we not also be, should our exports of dirty products also be accounted for in the same way that our export of clean products are?
Look, it's a global market and it's a global problem, and we have to reduce global emissions. And the way I look at it is that if we can live up to the spirit of what we signed on to in COP28, which recognizes natural gas as a transition fuel, a vitally important transition fuel, then we'll be able to reduce the overall global emissions profile. I can tell you what countries like South Korea and Japan and others tell us is that if they can't get those long-term supplies of things like LNG or ammonia, then they're just going to have more unabated coal that they bring on stream, which will actually increase overall emissions. So I would say that if we, in the spirit of looking at this as a global problem, understanding that there are interim measures that need to be taken, it seems to me that those are the kind of things that we should be partnering with our friends and allies on.
So you mentioned COP28 and the Paris Agreement. Do you support Canada remaining in the Paris Agreement?
Yes.
And the Paris Agreement predominantly is focused on reducing domestic emissions. You mentioned Article 6, but at this point, Article 6 hasn't been used to provide credits for the export of energy products from our country. The largest part of the Paris Agreement is reducing domestic emissions. And in that challenge, we have a plan put forward by the government that you take issue with. Have you tabled an alternative proposal, as the Prime Minister has suggested, that would contribute to meeting the requirements of the Paris Agreement?
Yes.
Very brief answer. I apologize, Premier.
Sure. My very first conversation with the Prime Minister was to tell him we were aligning with a 2050 target like our allies, and that I would produce an emissions reduction and energy development plan, which I did last April. And we've been working on a number of tables for how we will work on achieving some of those interim steps.
Thank you, Premier.
Thank you very much.